What if I told you that Caraco's insights are more relevant today than ever before? That his warnings about the concentration of wealth, the degradation of human relationships, and the environmental destruction we are witnessing right now were not just predictions, but a call to action? In this video, we're going to uncover how his thoughts on capitalism and its inevitable consequences have shaped modern anti-capitalist movements. How his ideas connect with today's struggles for economic justice and environmental sustainability, and why we can't afford to ignore what he had to say. From the overwhelming power of multinational corporations to the staggering wealth gap that seems to be widening every year, Caraco's words cut to the heart of the issues that define the world we live in. But it's not all doom and gloom, because Caraco also presented us with solutions. He advocated for a radically different world, one where the focus shifts from profit maximization to human dignity, collective responsibility, and environmental sustainability. And while the path to such a society might seem daunting, it's crucial that we not only understand these ideas, but begin to integrate them into our own actions. Before we dive in, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with your friends to get the conversation started. Your support helps us grow this platform and continue sharing critical insights like the ones we're about to explore. And if you find this content valuable, consider showing your appreciation with a super thanks. Your contribution makes a huge difference. Let's get into it. Albert Caraco, a French philosopher and writer, stands out for his profoundly pessimistic and anti-capitalist views. Born in 1919, his life unfolded in a period marked by tumultuous events both globally and within his native France. Caraco's philosophical perspective arose from the destructive forces he witnessed in the world, leading him to critique not only the social order, but also the economic system that shaped it. His ideas resonate with today's ongoing discussions about inequality, exploitation, and the human cost of capitalist systems. Caraco's early life in Paris was influenced by a world still reeling from the effects of World War I. Raised in a tumultuous environment, he quickly became disillusioned with traditional societal structures. His intellectual journey led him to explore philosophy, literature, and social theory, which informed his later critique of the capitalist system. Caraco's experience with war, economic depression, and the rise of fascist movements shaped his outlook on humanity's fragile state under capitalism. These global crises painted a picture of a world caught in a cycle of destruction, where exploitation was the norm, and the human spirit was compromised by a system prioritizing wealth accumulation over human dignity. His philosophical stance can be described as a blend of existential despair and Marxist critique, where he highlighted capitalism's inherent flaws. Caraco argued that the system itself, driven by greed, competition, and the unequal distribution of wealth, was the root cause of societal injustices. The concentration of wealth in the hands of few not only perpetuated inequality, but also nurtured a culture of exploitation that undermined the well-being of the masses. The capitalist structure, according to Caraco, was designed to prioritize profit over people, leaving the majority of the population disenfranchised and alienated. Caraco's writings, particularly The Black Messiah and The Possessed, provide insight into his disillusionment with contemporary society. In these works, Caraco critiques the cultural and political elite who, in his view, manipulated the masses for their own benefit. His ideas on capitalism were not merely academic. They were rooted in his deep understanding of human nature and history. Caraco's critique of capitalism was not limited to its economic impacts. He saw it as a force that dehumanized individuals, reducing them to mere cogs in the machinery of production and consumption. Central to Caraco's anti-capitalist philosophy is his belief in the dehumanizing effects of wealth accumulation. The rich, in his view, were not only morally corrupt, but also deeply disconnected from the realities of the working class. Caraco saw the accumulation of wealth as a form of social cancer, eating away at the moral fabric of society and leaving behind a world marked by alienation and spiritual emptiness. For Caraco, The rich lived in a world of luxury and excess, where their lives were detached from the struggles of the everyday person. The historical context in which Caraco wrote was also pivotal in shaping his philosophy. The 20th century, especially the period between the two world wars, was a time of profound social and economic change. Capitalism, in Caraco's view, had reached its peak, not only in terms of its economic dominance, but also in its capacity to exploit human labor. Caraco observed the rise of multinational corporations, the expansion of consumer culture, and the growing divide between the rich and the poor. The impact of these changes on the average person was not just financial, it was existential. The individual became lost in a system that valued profit over human life, leading to a sense of hopelessness and alienation that permeated society. It's important to understand that Caraco's critiques were not based on abstract theoretical ideas, but on lived experiences of societal decay. He saw firsthand how capitalism had led to the erosion of communities, the collapse of meaningful relationships, and the increasing reliance on superficial consumer goods to fill the void left by the system's inherent flaws. His writings were not simply philosophical musings. They were a call to understand the destructive power of capitalism and to seek alternatives that prioritized human dignity and social justice over profits. Caraco's perspective on capitalism was shaped by his deep empathy for those marginalized by the system. He understood that the capitalist framework created a world where only a select few enjoyed the benefits, while the majority were left to suffer. The exploitation of the working class was, in his view, not just an economic issue, but a moral one. Workers, he argued, were alienated from their labor and their humanity, reducing them to mere commodities. This dehumanization, according to Caraco, was the essence of capitalist exploitation. In contrast, Caraco believed that a truly just society could only emerge by dismantling the capitalist system and replacing it with a more equitable alternative. He was an advocate for democratic socialism and communalism, believing that these models could better serve the needs of the people and allow for a more just distribution of resources. However, Caraco was not naive. He acknowledged the challenges that would come with such a transformation. The entrenched power structures, the wealth disparity, and the cultural inertia made change seem like an insurmountable task. Yet, despite these challenges, Caraco maintained that change was necessary to reclaim human dignity and restore a sense of purpose to society. To understand Caraco's critique of capitalism fully, it is essential to examine the specific ways in which he believed the system failed the individual. One of the key aspects of his argument was the alienation that capitalism produces. In Caraco's view, individuals were reduced to commodities in a market-driven world. They became defined by their ability to consume and produce, losing their connection to deeper values like community, spirituality, and self-fulfillment. This alienation was not just economic. It was emotional and spiritual. People were disconnected from the things that truly mattered, such as family, love, and a sense of belonging, because they were caught in the endless cycle of work and consumption. Caraco's critique extends beyond just the exploitation of workers. He also highlighted the environmental costs of capitalism. The constant drive for profit led to the unchecked exploitation of natural resources, which, according to Caraco, had devastating consequences for the planet. He saw the capitalist drive for growth as a form of violence against nature, one that would ultimately lead to ecological collapse. In this regard, Caraco was ahead of his time, recognizing the unsustainable nature of capitalist growth and its disastrous effects on the environment long before modern discussions about climate change gained traction. Caraco's anti-capitalist philosophy offers a sobering and thought-provoking analysis of the capitalist system. His work reminds us that capitalism is not just an economic system, but a cultural force that shapes every aspect of our lives. By focusing on the ways in which capitalism dehumanizes, exploits, and destroys, Caraco encourages us to rethink the systems that govern our lives. His vision of a more just society, based on democratic socialism and communal values, offers a compelling alternative to the status quo. In conclusion, Albert Caraco's anti-capitalist philosophy is a powerful critique of a system that prioritizes profit over people and destroys both human dignity and the environment. His work remains highly relevant today as we grapple with the increasing inequality, environmental degradation, and alienation that characterize contemporary capitalism. Caraco's life and writings urge us to examine the deep flaws in the system and to seek alternatives that promote a more just and equitable world. Albert Caraco's critique of capitalism is not only a social and economic analysis, but also a profound philosophical commentary on the human condition within a system driven by profit. In his works, he repeatedly emphasizes the dehumanizing aspects of capitalism, focusing particularly on the exploitation of labor, the concentration of wealth and power, and environmental degradation caused by the insatiable quest for profit. Caraco's perspective on capitalism is one of deep pessimism, highlighting the system's inherent flaws and its damaging effects on both individuals and society at large. His views present capitalism as not merely an economic system, but a cultural and social force that erodes human dignity and ethical values. One of the central elements of Caraco's critique is his condemnation of the exploitation of labor. He sees the capitalist system as a structure that thrives on the constant extraction of value from workers, who are reduced to mere instruments of production. The laborer, in Caraco's view, is not only stripped of ownership over their work, but is also alienated from the fruits of their labor. This exploitation, Caraco argues, is fundamental to the functioning of capitalism. In a capitalist society, laborers, commodified workers are treated as assets to be used and discarded as needed by those in control of capital. The primary concern of capitalists is not the well-being of their workers, but the maximization of profit. This exploitation is exemplified by the way corporations and business owners treat their employees. Take, for example, the modern-day gig economy, where workers are not employed by companies in the traditional sense, but instead are hired on a temporary basis, often with few benefits, no job security, and low wages. The rise of companies like Uber, Amazon, and others has created a new class of workers who have little to no stability in their employment and are often denied the benefits that were once standard in more traditional forms of employment. While these companies make billions in profit, the workers who drive the cars, pack the goods, and perform the labor receive only a small fraction of the wealth generated. This is exactly the kind of exploitation that Caraco warned against, where the worker's life and labor are reduced to a commodity, and the capitalists who control the means of production continue to accumulate wealth without regard for the social costs. Caraco's analysis of the concentration of wealth and power in the hands of a few further amplifies the critical perspective he has on capitalism. In his view, the very nature of capitalism leads to an unequal distribution of wealth, which not only reinforces the economic disparity between the rich and the poor, but also consolidates power in the hands of a select few individuals and corporations. The accumulation of wealth, according to Caraco, does not result in a more efficient or fair society, but in a hierarchical structure where the ruling class controls the resources and makes decisions that benefit only themselves. This leads to a fundamental injustice in the social order, where a small group of wealthy individuals exert disproportionate influence over political, economic, and cultural life. The concentration of wealth in capitalist societies is starkly evident in the global disparity between the rich and the poor. A small percentage of the world's population controls the majority of its wealth, while billions of people live in poverty. In the United States, for example, the top 1% of earners control more wealth than the bottom 90% combined. This extreme concentration of wealth not only perpetuates inequality, but also exacerbates social tensions, leading to a fracturing of society. The wealthy elite can afford to influence policies, shape public opinion, and protect their wealth from the tax system, while the working class is left to bear the brunt of economic downturns and austerity measures. This vast disparity in wealth and power creates a system that is inherently unjust and undemocratic, where the interests of the many are subordinated to the desires of the few. Moreover, Caraco saw capitalism's accumulation of wealth as not only an economic problem, but a moral one. He argued that the very act of amassing wealth, particularly when done at the expense of others, corrupts the soul. The capitalist obsession with profit leads to a mindset where the individual is valued solely for their economic output. This mindset fosters a culture of competition and greed, where success is measured by financial gain rather than human fulfillment or societal contribution. The result is a society where the value of life is determined by one's ability to accumulate wealth, and people are reduced to their economic worth rather than their inherent dignity as human beings. Another critical aspect of Caraco's anti-capitalist philosophy is his analysis of the environmental destruction caused by capitalism. While capitalism's impact on society is often discussed in terms of economic inequality, Caraco recognized that the system's relentless drive for growth also has profound consequences for the natural world. Capitalism, in its pursuit of profit, exploits natural resources without regard for sustainability. The overuse of the Earth's resources, Caraco argued, is not an unfortunate byproduct of the system, but an intrinsic feature of it. Capitalism's inherent need for continuous expansion means that nature is viewed merely as a resource to be extracted and used, rather than a delicate and finite system that requires stewardship. One of the most striking aspects of Caraco's environmental critique is his recognition of the long-term effects of unchecked industrial growth. The capitalist system is built on the premise of infinite growth in a world that has finite resources. This contradiction lies at the heart of the environmental crisis we face today. From deforestation to climate change to the depletion of natural resources, the capitalist model has created an ecological disaster that threatens the very survival of the planet. Caraco's critique of capitalism foresaw many of the environmental challenges that have since become pressing global issues. His focus on the unsustainable nature of capitalist growth aligns with modern concerns about the planet's capacity to sustain a growing population driven by consumption and industrial production. Take, for example, the oil industry, which has been at the heart of global capitalism for over a century. The extraction and burning of fossil fuels have led to widespread environmental degradation, from oil spills to air pollution to the accelerated pace of global warming. The relentless pursuit of profit by oil companies, driven by shareholder interests and the capitalist drive for expansion, has resulted in catastrophic environmental consequences. Caraco's analysis of capitalism's relationship with the environment is a prescient warning of the ecological crises we face today. As the insatiable thirst for profit continues to deplete natural resources and harm the planet. Furthermore, Caraco's critique of capitalism's environmental impact is closely tied to his broader view of the system's dehumanizing effects. The environmental damage caused by capitalist expansion is not merely an abstract concern, but has real-world consequences for marginalized communities. Poor and working-class people are often the ones who suffer the most from environmental degradation, whether through pollution, climate change, or the destruction of their natural resources. The wealthy, who are most responsible for the environmental harm, are often the least affected by it, further exacerbating social inequality. Caraco's analysis of capitalism's environmental toll underscores the fundamental contradictions within the system. Capitalism requires endless growth, but this growth comes at the expense of the planet's health and the well-being of future generations. In this light, Caraco's critique offers not just an economic analysis, but a moral one, urging us to reconsider the values that drive our global economic system. It forces us to ask whether the pursuit of wealth is worth the destruction it causes to both human lives and the environment. Caraco's critique of capitalism, focusing on the exploitation of labor, the concentration of wealth and power, and the environmental destruction it causes, presents a sobering view of the system's inherent flaws. His work offers a powerful reminder that capitalism, while providing immense wealth for a select few, also generates inequality, alienation, and environmental collapse. His philosophical insights encourage us to think critically about the system that shapes our lives and to consider alternative models that prioritize human dignity, social justice, and ecological sustainability. The challenges Caraco identified are as relevant today as they were in his time, urging us to address the injustices and dangers posed by capitalism before they reach an irreversible point. Albert Caraco's analysis of capitalism delves deep into the societal consequences of a system built on profit and competition. He presents capitalism not just as an economic system, but as a force that profoundly shapes social structures, human relationships, and individual identities. Through his critique, Caraco exposes the ways in which capitalism exacerbates inequality, fosters consumerism, and alienates individuals from their true humanity. These consequences are not mere side effects of a flawed system. They're intrinsic to the very nature of capitalism. Caraco's work challenges us to rethink the values that underpin our economic systems and to confront the damaging impact of capitalism on both society and the individual. One of the most significant aspects of Caraco's critique is his analysis of the increasing inequality and social division fostered by capitalism. In a capitalist society, wealth is not distributed equally. Rather, it is concentrated in the hands of small elite, leaving the majority of people to struggle in poverty or economic uncertainty. Caraco argues that this inequality is not an accidental byproduct of capitalism, but a feature built into the system. Capitalism thrives on competition and profit maximization, which inherently leads to the creation of winners and losers. As wealth accumulates in the hands of a few, the rest of society is left to cope with the consequences of economic deprivation, lack of opportunity, and social exclusion. This concentration of wealth and power is not only economic but also political. The wealthy class, by virtue of their resources, has significant influence over the political system, shaping policies and decisions that further entrench their position at the top of the social hierarchy. For the working class, this results in a lack of access to opportunities and resources, perpetuating a cycle of poverty and social mobility that is increasingly out of reach. The education system, healthcare, and even basic needs like housing are often shaped by market forces, making it difficult for the poor to break out of their socio-economic status. Caraco's view of capitalism's impact on class division is starkly illustrated in the real-world disparities seen across the globe. In the United States, for example, the wealth gap has reached levels not seen since the early 20th century, with the top 1% of the population controlling a disproportionate amount of the nation's wealth. This economic inequality translates into vast differences in quality of life, with the rich enjoying luxury while the poor struggle to make ends meet. The rise of income inequality has been accompanied by a decrease in social mobility, meaning that the children of the wealthy are more likely to remain wealthy, while the children of the poor face significant barriers to upward mobility. In addition to economic inequality, Caraco critiques the cultural implications of capitalism, particularly the rise of consumerism. Under capitalism, consumer culture is not just a side effect of economic growth. It is actively encouraged and promoted. Capitalism relies on the constant production and consumption of goods to drive profits. As a result, individuals are constantly bombarded with advertisements and messages telling them that they're defined by what they own. This leads to a culture of excess, where the value of a person is tied to their ability to consume, and their worth is measured by the material possessions they can accumulate. Caraco argues that this consumerist culture creates a sense of dissatisfaction and emptiness. The more people consume, the more they're told they need to consume. In this system, happiness and fulfillment are equated with the acquisition of goods, but this pursuit is ultimately hollow. Individuals become trapped in a never-ending cycle of desire and consumption. but they never reach the satisfaction they seek. Instead, they are left with a sense of unfulfilled longing, as the promise of happiness through material goods proves to be a false one. An example of this can be seen in the rise of retail therapy in modern society. People often turn to shopping as a way to cope with stress, anxiety, or dissatisfaction with their lives. This impulse to buy, often driven by marketing campaigns, provides a temporary sense of relief, but it does not address the underlying emotional or existential issues. The consumer culture Caraco critiques encourages people to fill the emptiness inside with more stuff, but it never leads to true satisfaction or fulfillment. Furthermore, Caraco's critique of consumerism extends to the environmental consequences of this insatiable drive for consumption. The capitalist model relies on the constant extraction of resources to meet the growing demand for products, leading to environmental degradation, waste, and pollution. The pursuit of profit often comes at the expense of the planet, with natural resources being depleted at an unsustainable rate. This environmental harm, while often invisible to those who benefit from it, has a profound impact on society, particularly the most vulnerable communities who bear the brunt of environmental damage. Caraco's critique also delves into the dehumanizing effects of capitalism, which reduces people to mere cogs in a machine. Under capitalism, individuals are not seen as ends in themselves, but as means to an end, specifically the end of profit maximization. People become commodities, their labor bought and sold in the market, and their value is determined by their ability to contribute to the production and consumption cycle. This reduction of the human being to a unit of labor or consumption leads to alienation, a sense of disconnection from one's true self. In a capitalist society, people are often alienated from their work. Rather than finding fulfillment or meaning in what they do, they view their labor as a necessary evil to make money, so they can buy more things. This alienation extends beyond the workplace, affecting all aspects of life. The constant pressure to perform, to be productive, and to consume leaves little room for personal reflection, meaningful relationships, or spiritual growth. People are caught in a cycle of work and consumption that leaves them feeling empty and disconnected from their true selves. Caraco's analysis of alienation can be seen in the rise of mental health issues in capitalist societies. Anxiety, depression, and feelings of inadequacy are common among individuals who are caught in the capitalist system, as they struggle to meet the ever-growing demands placed on them. In this context, mental health becomes another commodity to be bought and sold, with pharmaceutical companies profiting from the growing demand for antidepressants and other medications. The dehumanizing effects of capitalism also extend to personal relationships. In a society that prioritizes profit, relationships are often reduced to transactions, with people viewing others as either assets or obstacles to their own success. This transactional approach to relationships leads to a breakdown in community, as people become more isolated and focused on their individual gain rather than the collective well-being. In such a society, the values of love, friendship, and solidarity are undermined, leaving individuals to fend for themselves in an increasingly competitive and hostile world. This alienation and loss of human connection are not just abstract concepts. They are visible in the everyday lives of people living in capitalist societies. For example, the rise of social media has created a culture of constant comparison, where individuals measure their worth by the number of likes or followers they have. This superficial form of validation fosters a sense of emptiness, as people seek approval from others through virtual means rather than forming deep, meaningful connections. Caraco's critique of capitalism highlights the systemic nature of these issues. The alienation, consumerism, and inequality are not isolated problems, but are interconnected and exacerbated by the capitalist system. Capitalism, by its very nature, encourages competition, profit maximization, and the exploitation of people and resources. These dynamics create a society where individuals are alienated from their true selves, trapped in cycles of consumption and labor, and divided by vast inequalities of wealth and power. The social cost of capitalism, according to Caraco, is not just economic but deeply human. It strips people of their dignity, their sense of connection to others, and their ability to lead meaningful lives. In summary, Caraco's analysis of capitalism provides a sobering view of the profound impact that this economic system has on society and the individual. Through his critique, Caraco urges us to recognize the ways in which capitalism fosters inequality, drives excessive consumerism, and alienates individuals from their humanity. The capitalist system, in Caraco's view, is not just an economic order, but a cultural and social force that distorts human relationships, undermines personal fulfillment, and perpetuates injustice. In a world shaped by capitalism, individuals are not seen as ends in themselves, but as means to an end profit. It is through this lens that Caraco's work invites us to question the values that underpin our modern world and to consider alternative ways of organizing society that prioritize human dignity, solidarity, and sustainability over wealth accumulation and competition. Albert Caraco's critiques of capitalism are not merely theoretical. They are grounded in a deep belief in the possibility of societal transformation. Caraco doesn't just point out the inherent flaws of capitalism, but also proposes alternatives that aim to build a more just, sustainable, and humane society. Central to his vision are democratic socialism and communalism, two models that seek to address the injustices inherent in capitalist societies. These alternatives, according to Caraco, offer the potential for a society that prioritizes human dignity over profit and collective well-being over individual accumulation. Democratic socialism, in Caraco's view, represents a political and economic framework that seeks to replace capitalism with a system where the means of production are owned or regulated by the state or the community for the benefit of all. This model emphasizes the role of democratic governance in ensuring that wealth and resources are distributed equitably. In Caraco's critique of capitalism, the fundamental issue is the concentration of wealth and power in the hands of a few, which perpetuates inequality and exploitation. Democratic socialism aims to break up these concentrations of power, allowing for more collective control over economic and political decision-making. The principle behind democratic socialism is simple. The people, through democratic institutions, should have control over the economy. This would involve extensive reforms in which the state takes responsibility for key sectors such as healthcare, education, and housing. By doing so, the system would provide a more equitable distribution of resources, ensuring that the basic needs of all individuals are met, regardless of their economic status. Caraco argued that in a truly democratic socialist society, individuals would no longer be reduced to commodities whose value is measured by their ability to generate profit. Instead, people would be valued for their inherent worth, and social programs would be designed to meet the needs of the many, not the few. Communalism, on the other hand, offers another potential solution to the problems Caraco identified with capitalism. Communalism advocates for the decentralization of power and the establishment of self-governing communities where resources are shared and decisions are made collectively. Caraco believed that the future of society lies not in top-down governance or market-driven economics, but in the hands of communities that work together for the common good. In communalism, individuals would no longer be isolated by the demands of capitalism, but would instead be integrated into a network of social bonds that prioritize mutual support and collective responsibility. The vision of communalism that Caraco proposed would involve a complete reimagining of social and economic relations. It is a model based on cooperation rather than competition, where the goal is not individual success, but collective prosperity. People would organize themselves into local, democratic communes, where resources are shared, and decisions are made by the community as a whole. These communes would be self-sustaining and independent of the state and the market. The focus would be on meeting the needs of the people within the community, rather than on generating profits for outside investors. In Caraco's view, this model would create a more humane and equitable society, where the values of solidarity and cooperation replace the individualistic, profit-driven motives of capitalism. However, while these solutions are compelling, Caraco recognized that the path to realizing such a vision would be fraught with challenges. The most significant obstacle to implementing democratic socialism or communalism is the entrenched power structures that capitalism has established. The political and economic elites who control the vast majority of the world's wealth and resources have a vested interest in maintaining the status quo. They benefit from the system of inequality and exploitation that capitalism sustains, and they are unlikely to relinquish their power without significant resistance. This resistance, according to Caraco, is not just political, it is cultural as well. Capitalism has embedded itself so deeply in the social fabric that it shapes not only the economy, but also people's values, desires, and expectations. The consumerist culture that capitalism has fostered is so pervasive that many individuals are unaware of how deeply they are invested in the capitalist system. The pursuit of material wealth and the belief in individualism as the key to success are ingrained in modern society, making it difficult for people to imagine an alternative. Caraco's vision, therefore, calls for a radical shift in both political structures and cultural attitudes, one that challenges the very foundations of capitalist ideology. To make democratic socialism or communalism a reality, it would be necessary to dismantle the existing structures of power and wealth. This would require a profound transformation of the economic system, in which wealth is redistributed and economic decision-making is decentralized. The state, under democratic socialism, would play a key role in regulating industries, ensuring equitable access to resources, and protecting the environment. In communalism, the emphasis would be on creating small, self-sustaining communities that are independent of both the state and the capitalist market. These communities would operate on the principles of democracy, mutual aid, and shared responsibility, ensuring that everyone's basic needs are met. But the challenge of making these alternatives work is not only about overcoming entrenched power structures. There are also practical difficulties involved in transitioning from a capitalist system to one based on democratic socialism or communalism. For example, the scale of such a transformation would require massive shifts in how people live and work. In a world dominated by multinational corporations and global supply chains, creating self-sustaining communities would require a complete reorganization of production and distribution. The transition to democratic socialism would also require significant reforms in political systems, including the redistribution of wealth and the establishment of universal social programs. These reforms would face fierce opposition from the wealthy and powerful elites who benefit from the current system. Furthermore, there are questions about the feasibility of these systems in the modern world. While democratic socialism has been implemented in various forms, especially in Scandinavian countries like Sweden and Denmark, these systems are often constrained by the global capitalist economy. The success of democratic socialism in these countries has been largely dependent on their ability to operate within the global capitalist system, which limits the extent to which they can truly challenge capitalism at a global scale. Communalism, while an appealing alternative in theory, has been harder to implement on a large scale, as it requires a fundamental rethinking of how society is organized and how people relate to one another. The challenge is not just about creating a new economic model, but about convincing people to adopt new values and behaviors that prioritize collective well-being over individual accumulation. Despite these challenges, Caraco believed that a fundamental shift in the economic system was necessary for the creation of a just and equitable society. He argued that capitalism, by its very nature, perpetuates inequality, exploitation, and environmental degradation. For Caraco, the need to change the system was urgent. He saw the rise of capitalism as an irreversible force that had, over time, transform societies in ways that undermine human dignity and collective responsibility. The task now, according to Caraco, was to build alternative systems that could replace capitalism, and in doing so, create a world where people could live in harmony with one another and with nature. The need for an alternative economic system, whether through democratic socialism, communalism, or another model, is as relevant today as it was in Caraco's time. The global capitalist system continues to perpetuate inequality, drive environmental destruction, and create alienation among individuals. Caraco's call for change, though difficult, remains a powerful reminder that we must challenge the status quo and seek alternatives that prioritize human dignity, social justice, and environmental sustainability. In conclusion, Caraco's vision of democratic socialism and communalism offers a compelling critique of capitalism and a potential path forward toward a more just and equitable society. However, the challenges to implementing these systems are significant, ranging from entrenched power structures to cultural attitudes and practical difficulties. The question, as Caraco would have posed, is not whether such a transformation is possible, but whether we, as a society, are willing to confront the injustices of capitalism and work toward creating a world that values human life, collective well-being, and sustainability over profit and accumulation. Albert Caraco's philosophical critique of capitalism, while rooted in the mid-20th century, remains remarkably relevant to modern discussions surrounding economic justice, social inequality, and the environmental crises precipitated by capitalist systems. His work serves as both a cautionary tale and a call to action for those grappling with the deep injustices perpetuated by global economic systems. Through his exploration of capitalism's inherent flaws, Caraco has had a profound influence on contemporary anti-capitalist movements, providing a theoretical foundation for social and political activism seeking to address the systemic inequities of wealth distribution and environmental degradation. In today's context, his ideas resonate with many of the struggles faced by those fighting for economic fairness, climate justice, and a more human-centered approach to governance and commerce. Caraco's critique of capitalism's concentration of wealth and power has found fertile ground in the modern anti-capitalist movements. His writings prefigured many of the concerns raised by today's global protests against economic inequality. In recent years, we have seen a surge in movements such as Occupy Wall Street, the Global Justice Movement, and Extinction Rebellion, which echo Caraco's insights into the disproportionate power held by the economic elite. These movements, driven by a combination of disillusionment with the status quo and a demand for justice, have drawn from Caraco's warnings about the dangers of an economy that prioritizes profits over people. Occupy Wall Street, for example, highlighted the growing divide between the 1% and the rest of society, something Caraco identified as a fundamental flaw in capitalism. The protesters' rallying cry, "We are the 99%, resonates with Caraco's critique of the way the capitalist system ensures the concentration of wealth in the hands of a few, while the majority of people continue to suffer from economic deprivation. In many ways, Occupy Wall Street and similar movements can be seen as direct descendants of Caraco's ideas about the moral and social dangers of unchecked capitalism. Moreover, Caraco's ideas about capitalism's negative impact on social relations, especially the alienation of individuals from their true selves, align closely with the philosophical underpinnings of these movements. Many activists and thinkers within the anti-capitalist framework today echo Caraco's sentiment that capitalism alienates individuals, turning them into mere commodities in a system where value is measured by productivity and consumption. For instance, the rise of the gig economy, in which workers are treated as disposable assets, directly mirrors Caraco's concerns about the commodification of labor. Companies like Uber, Amazon, and other tech giants rely on a workforce that lacks stability, benefits, or recognition as valuable contributors beyond their output. This, according to Caraco, is the very essence of capitalist exploitation. The worker is no longer seen as a person, but as a tool for production. In the realm of climate activism, Caraco's critique of the environmental degradation wrought by capitalism also finds resonance today. The relentless exploitation of natural resources for profit, a hallmark of capitalist systems, has led to environmental destruction on an unprecedented scale. Caraco's warnings about the unsustainable nature of capitalist growth have been vindicated by the current climate crisis. As the world faces increasingly severe weather events, biodiversity loss, and a changing climate, Caraco's early critique of capitalism's disregard for the environment seems almost prophetic. Modern climate movements like Fridays for Future, spearheaded by Greta Thunberg, are echoing Caraco's call for systemic change, demanding that we overhaul our economic models to prioritize sustainability over endless growth. The growing awareness of climate change and environmental injustice has led to increased advocacy for what some are calling a Green New Deal, an economic framework that aims to combat climate change, while simultaneously addressing income inequality. This idea, in many ways, aligns with Caraco's vision of a more just society, where economic structures are redesigned to serve the collective good rather than private profit. The Green New Deal advocates for large-scale investments in clean energy, green infrastructure, and social programs that would redistribute wealth and ensure that no one is left behind in the transition to a more sustainable future. Just as Caraco saw the need to dismantle capitalist systems for the greater good of society, contemporary climate movements are also pushing for a fundamental shift in how the global economy operates. At the same time, Caraco's ideas have relevance in the broader discussion on income inequality. Today's increasing wealth gap between the ultra-rich and the rest of society is a stark reflection of the capitalist systems Caraco critiqued. In the United States, for example, the wealthiest 1% control more than 40% of the nation's wealth, while millions of people live in poverty or face precarious economic conditions. Caraco's critique of the inherent inequality of capitalism provides a theoretical lens through which we can understand the social and economic divisions that characterize much of the modern world. His assertion that the concentration of wealth leads to both economic and social instability is echoed by economists and social theorists today who argue that the growing disparity between the rich and the poor is not only a moral crisis, but a structural one. The issue of income inequality is not only a moral one, but also a political issue, and Caraco's work speaks directly to the need for a transformation of the political economy. Contemporary debates over tax reform, minimum wage increases, and universal basic income, UBI, all find their roots in the critiques of capitalism that Caraco laid out. The idea of UBI, for instance, reflects Caraco's vision of a society where the basic needs of individuals are met regardless of their participation in the labor market. In a capitalist society, where work is often dehumanizing and exploitative, a guaranteed income could provide individuals with the economic freedom to pursue meaningful work or contribute to society in ways that go beyond mere economic productivity. Moreover, Caraco's ideas are increasingly relevant in the age of globalization, where the effects of capitalism are no longer confined to a single nation, but have spread globally, impacting economies, societies, and the environment on a planetary scale. The multinational corporations that dominate global trade and finance are, according to Caraco's critique, the driving forces behind a system that exacerbates inequality, exploits labor, and destroys the environment. Global trade agreements, tax avoidance schemes, and the race to the bottom in labor standards all reflect the ways in which capitalism exploits nations and workers around the world. Caraco's critique, then, offers a global framework for understanding and addressing these issues, pointing out that the capitalist system is not just a national concern, but a global one that must be challenged on all fronts. Today, as debates over the future of work, wealth distribution, and environmental sustainability continue to gain prominence, Caraco's work remains relevant as a guide for those seeking alternatives to the capitalist system. His influence is evident in the rise of progressive movements advocating for economic justice, social equality, and environmental protection. The lessons of Caraco's anti-capitalist philosophy urge us to think critically about the systems of power that govern our world and to consider radical alternatives that prioritize human dignity and ecological sustainability. The relevance of Caraco's ideas also extends to the ongoing discussions about the future of democracy. In many ways, capitalism has eroded democratic institutions, concentrating power in the hands of corporate elites and undermining the ability of citizens to influence the policies that govern their lives. Caraco's vision of a society built on democratic socialism or communalism offers an alternative to the corporate-controlled democracies that dominate the world today. By advocating for decentralized decision-making and collective ownership, Caraco's ideas challenge us to rethink how democracy can function in a world where economic power is concentrated in the hands of a few. In summary, the legacy of Albert Caraco's anti-capitalist philosophy continues to reverberate in the modern world. His critiques of wealth inequality, environmental destruction, and the dehumanizing effects of capitalism provide a powerful framework for understanding the issues that define contemporary society. From movements for economic justice to climate activism and calls for democratic socialism, Caraco's influence is palpable in the ongoing struggles for a more just, equitable, and sustainable world. His work remains as relevant today as ever, offering a compelling vision of what a truly humane and sustainable society might look like. Albert Caraco's critique of capitalism presents a thorough and grim analysis of how the capitalist system shapes societies, exploits labor, exacerbates inequalities, and undermines environmental sustainability. His reflections were not just theoretical. They were an urgent call to action, offering alternatives to the destructive forces of capitalism. Caraco's analysis draws attention to the dehumanizing consequences of a system that places profit above all else, and his work remains relevant today as we grapple with the very issues he foresaw: growing economic inequality, environmental devastation, and a global society deeply entrenched in the consumerist ethos. His central argument is that capitalism, as it exists, cannot be reformed into something just or sustainable. It must be replaced with systems that prioritize human dignity, social equity, and ecological balance. A critical pillar of Caraco's philosophy is his denunciation of capitalism's inherent exploitation of labor. He argues that the capitalist system thrives on extracting value from the labor of the many while enriching a few. Workers are reduced to mere commodities, and their human needs are subordinated to the relentless demands of production and profit. Caraco saw capitalism as a system that not only disenfranchises workers economically, but also alienates them from their true selves and from one another. This sense of alienation, where people lose connection with the intrinsic meaning of their work and their relationships, is at the core of Caraco's critique. In a world where work is primarily viewed as a means to generate profit, it becomes difficult to see work as a source of personal fulfillment, social connection, or human growth. Instead, it becomes something that separates individuals from their communities and from the purpose of their existence. Caraco also highlights the concentration of wealth and power as one of the most destructive features of capitalism. He points out that the very structure of capitalism ensures that wealth accumulates in the hands of a tiny elite, creating vast disparities between the wealthy and the impoverished. This system of extreme wealth accumulation not only widens the economic gap, but also erodes the social fabric by reducing individuals to their economic worth. The wealthy elite, in Caraco's view, control not only economic resources, but also political and cultural power. They dictate the terms of governance, shaping policies that serve their interests while ignoring or actively undermining the needs of the broader population. The result is a society where the vast majority are disenfranchised, and the dreams of social mobility are increasingly unattainable. In addition to the economic inequalities and social injustices, Caraco's critique extends to the environmental degradation caused by capitalism's need for constant growth and consumption. Caraco recognized the destructive nature of this system long before the environmental crises of the 21st century became so pronounced. He saw that the capitalist drive for endless expansion leads to the exploitation of natural resources without regard for sustainability. The need to fuel an ever-growing economy with raw materials, fossil fuels, and consumer goods leads to ecological ruin. The devastating effects of deforestation, soil depletion, and climate change are direct consequences of a capitalist system that treats the earth as a resource to be mined for profit. In Caraco's time, these issues were not as publicly acknowledged as they are today, but his warnings about environmental destruction foreshadowed the global challenges we face now. At the heart of Caraco's anti-capitalist philosophy is his call for alternatives. He advocated for democratic socialism and communalism as solutions to the inherent flaws of capitalism. Democratic socialism, for Caraco, would involve the collective ownership or regulation of key sectors of the economy to ensure that wealth is distributed more equitably. Instead of a system where the wealthy few control vast amounts of resources, democratic socialism envisions a society where the people collectively decide how resources are allocated, ensuring that everyone has access to basic needs like healthcare, education, and housing. In contrast, Caraco's vision of communalism goes further, suggesting that local communities should govern themselves independently of both the state and the capitalist market. By focusing on cooperation and mutual aid, communalism would replace competition with solidarity, allowing for a society that is not driven by profit, but by human needs. Caraco's critique, though rooted in the past, is deeply relevant to the present. Today, we are witnessing the acceleration of many of the issues he identified: growing inequality, ecological collapse, and a system that values profit over people. In the face of these crises, Caraco's ideas offer a guide for those who seek to challenge the status quo and work toward a more just and sustainable future. His call to dismantle capitalist structures and replace them with systems of collective ownership, solidarity, and mutual aid is echoed in modern movements advocating for economic justice, climate action, and social change. Caraco's philosophy challenges us to confront the root causes of social and environmental degradation and to build alternatives that prioritize human dignity over economic gain. Caraco's work provides an essential framework for understanding the moral and social consequences of capitalism. It encourages us to think critically about the values that govern our societies and to consider the long-term effects of economic systems that prioritize growth over well-being. His ideas are a reminder that the fight for a better world is not just about addressing surface-level issues like income inequality or climate change, but about changing the very systems that create these problems. Caraco's work challenges us to envision a world where economic systems are designed to serve people, not profit, and where human relationships are based on mutual respect, cooperation, and collective responsibility. However, while Caraco's ideas offer a powerful critique of capitalism, they also present a challenge. Implementing alternatives to capitalism is no small task, and the transition from a capitalist society to one based on democratic socialism or communalism would require significant changes in both political structures and cultural values. The entrenched power of global elites, the dominance of consumer culture, and the deeply embedded structures of capitalist economics all make such a transformation daunting. But Caraco's work reminds us that meaningful change is possible and necessary. He calls on us to imagine a society where the pursuit of profit is not the driving force of human activity, and where social justice and ecological sustainability take precedence over individual wealth accumulation. One of the most profound lessons from Caraco's work is the need to rethink our relationship with the world around us. Capitalism, with its insatiable appetite for growth, has led to the degradation of the environment, the disintegration of social bonds, and the alienation of individuals from their true selves. The values of competition, consumption, and individualism that define capitalist societies have created a world where the pursuit of happiness is seen as something that can be bought and consumed rather than experienced through meaningful relationships, personal fulfillment, and community engagement. Caraco's critique forces us to reconsider these values and to seek alternatives that are more sustainable, more humane, and more equitable. In practical terms, Caraco's critique can be seen as a call for personal and collective action. On a personal level, we can begin by examining our own relationship to consumerism and questioning the ways in which we participate in systems that perpetuate inequality and environmental destruction. This might mean choosing to consume less, supporting businesses that prioritize ethical practices, and advocating for policies that promote environmental sustainability. On a collective level, we can work to build communities that are grounded in principles of cooperation and solidarity, rather than competition and individualism. This could involve supporting movements that push for systemic change, such as those advocating for a Green New Deal or universal basic income, and engaging in local initiatives that promote social justice and environmental responsibility. The key to Caraco's vision is that change must come not only from the top down through policy reform and economic restructuring, but also from the bottom up. It is the responsibility of individuals, communities, and social movements to push for change and to build alternatives to the capitalist system. Caraco's work emphasizes that we cannot simply hope for change to happen. We must actively work to create the world we want to see. This means engaging in collective action, pushing for policy reforms, and challenging the deeply ingrained structures that perpetuate inequality, exploitation, and environmental destruction. Ultimately, the lessons from Caraco's anti-capitalist philosophy are as relevant today as they were when he first articulated them. The challenges he identified, growing inequality, environmental destruction, and the commodification of human life, are still with us. But Caraco's work also offers a vision of hope. It shows us that the problems we face are not inevitable or unsolvable, but are the result of systems that can be changed. By reimagining our economic systems, reshaping our social values, and working toward collective solutions, we can begin to create a world that prioritizes human dignity, social justice, and ecological sustainability. The question is not whether we can change the system, but whether we are willing to confront the inequalities and injustices that Caraco so powerfully described and take action to create a better future. So, what do we learn from Albert Caraco today? His work is a striking reminder that capitalism, in its current form, is not only failing the majority of people on this planet, but is also systematically destroying the environment that sustains us. He challenged us to confront the ways in which economic systems reduce human beings to mere commodities, stripped of their worth and dignity. But more importantly, Caraco didn't just critique the system, he offered alternatives that could help pave the way for a better, more just future, whether through democratic socialism or communalism. Caraco's vision reminds us that we can build a world that values people over profits. A world where the power and wealth that are so unfairly concentrated today are distributed in ways that truly benefit everyone, not just the elites. But how we get there? The path may seem difficult, but it starts with a shift in our thinking, followed by actions both big and small. It starts with each of us questioning the systems that sustain inequality and exploitation and imagining new ways of living together in a more just and sustainable world. This is where you come in. The future of our world depends on how we respond to the challenges we face. It's not just about acknowledging the problems, it's about actively engaging in the fight for a better future. Start by questioning your role in the system. How can you make more conscious choices in your own life to reduce your environmental impact, challenge unjust systems, or support communities working for change? Whether you're actively involved in movements for economic justice, climate action, or social reform, remember that every small step counts. Now, it's up to us to act. to make our voices heard, to push for changes that prioritize human dignity over corporate profits, and to build the world Caraco envisioned a world where people, not systems, come first. But before you go, take a moment to like this video if you found it thought-provoking, share it with those who might benefit from these ideas, and subscribe to stay updated on future content. Your engagement helps keep these critical conversations alive. And if you feel compelled to support the channel further, please consider donating a super thanks. It's an easy way to show your appreciation and directly contribute to the growth of this platform. Let's make sure we don't just think about change, but that we take action to make it happen. Thank you for watching, and remember, the change starts with us.